Hello everyone, this is my lecture on photosynthesis, chapter 10 from Campbell Biology. So photosynthesis is a metabolic process and basically it's life from light and air. Energy needs of life, all living things need energy. They are endergonic systems and there are heterotrophs or animals who get their energy from eating other organisms. They also make energy by breaking down those organic molecules from other organisms, and that is through respiration. Those are the consumers, and then we have autotrophs or plants who are producers who produce their own energy, and they use the energy of the sunlight and build their own organic molecules from carbon dioxide from the air, and that is photosynthesis. The organic molecules that plants fix by using energy, sun's energy, is consumed by heterotrophs. So it is basically the carbon cycle. So how are heterotrophs and autotrophs connected? They are connected through the processes of cellular respiration and photosynthesis. So here is the general equation for cellular respiration, and we see that glucose is being oxidized through an exergonic process or a catabolic process, and carbon dioxide is produced, along with which water and also ATP is produced. And autotrophs, they make their energy and organic molecules from light energy. So here carbon dioxide is reduced into glucose, which is an endergonic process, requires an input of light energy, and that glucose is consumed by heterotrophs. What it means to be a plant? Plant needs to have the structure and the function that allows it to be a plant. Basically, it needs to collect light energy, which it does by using its flat solar panels, which are nothing but its leaves. It needs to store light energy in some form of stable molecule that can be moved around, and that would be glucose. Plants also need to obtain the building block atoms from the environment, and that would be atoms of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, the SNOPs. And plants will get that from their environment, either from the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide. So carbon mainly comes from the air, the atmosphere, and then there is water that comes in from the roots. Along with it are other minerals such as nitrogen, NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And plants use those building block atoms and produce all of their organic molecules, the 4 macromolecules we've learned about. So here are the structures that allow plants to do so. Their leaves are the solar collectors. The carbon dioxide comes in through those leaves, through the stomates in those leaves. Water, of course, comes in from the roots, uptake from roots. Water is absorbed by the roots, and then it goes all the way up to the leaves where photosynthesis takes place. Now water travels through the stem and reaches the leaves, sometimes several meters high, and that would be because of the difference in water potential, adhesion, cohesion, capillary action, and of course because of transpiration, water loss from the stomates in the leaves, which will allow the uptake of water from the roots. Along with the water, nutrients are also absorbed from the roots. Again, the 3 main nutrients would be nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those come from the soil. And carbon dioxide, always, the carbon, the major source of carbon, is from the atmosphere. Here we see a hypothetical plant. Tomatoes and potatoes are shown in the same diagram because it's a model plant and it's just showing what are the starch or the sugar storage organs in that possibly could be in a plant. Plants make the sugars and sometimes they will store the sugars in certain organs. Here we see a cross section of the leaf, and it is interesting to see that leaves will be darker on their upper surface and lighter on the lower surface, and that is because on the upper surface, just below the epidermis, is going to be tightly packed layer of cells called the palisade, and then there would be a layer of spongy mesophyll underneath, and each layer is efficient in its own way. For example, the upper layer of palisade tissue has a lot of chloroplasts and will be efficient in trapping the sun's light. And the lower layers, the cells are loosely arranged so that it can efficiently participate in gas exchange and also transpiration. Transpiration is important for plants because only when there is water lost through transpiration, more water can be absorbed through the roots. So water uptake can happen only when transpiration happens. Chloroplasts, these are the organelles in plant cells that allow plants to make sugars. There is the chlorophyll pigment in chloroplast that allow it to do so. A little bit about the structure of chloroplast. The chloroplast has double membrane. There would be an outer membrane and an inner membrane. So a double membrane, and each membrane is a bilayer. In addition, there are thylakoids inside the chloroplast and also a fluid-filled interior called the stroma. Stroma is different from stoma, which is basically the pores on the leaves. But here we are talking about stroma, which is the fluid-filled interior, the region inside the chloroplast that we will later on see that Calvin cycle takes place. So thylakoid sacs, membranous sacs, lots of membrane, lots of surface area. A stack of thylakoids is known as a granum. So the thylakoid membrane contains some very important proteins, chlorophyll molecules, and that is where the electron transport chain takes place. And of course, ATP synthase that is going to produce the ATP. Here we see a beautiful electron micrograph of the chloroplast, and we see the thylakoids. Here is a model diagram, a simplistic drawing of the chloroplast, wherein we are seeing only one thylakoid. And inside the thylakoid, we see the hydrogen ion gradient, the hydrogen ion concentration being built up. The thylakoid membrane allows that concentration gradient to be built and maintained. It will also have ATP synthase, which will be responsible for generation or production of ATP. So here is the overall reaction of photosynthesis. We see that light reactions, also known as light-dependent reactions, they take place in the thylakoid. Those are the energy conversion reactions, and water is taken in, water is split into oxygen, and later on it produces ATP and NADPH, and those forms of energy are passed on to the Calvin cycle, which are also known as the light independent reactions. and those are the sugar building reactions. So here is the light conversion reactions, energy conversion reactions, and here we are actually going to build sugars, and that will take place in the stroma. Intake of carbon dioxide and building of sugars will happen there. So light reactions are basically electron transport chain that we saw in cellular respiration, and there are proteins embedded in the thylakoid membrane, and similar to proteins that were embedded in the inner membrane of the mitochondrion. And finally, the electron acceptors that would bring in those electrons that would help pump the protons across the membrane. Um, we are seeing both the organelles in this diagram. We have the mitochondria and chloroplast because we have also the membrane that allows pumping of the proton and building that gradient. And the gradient will be built in the mitochondria in the intermembrane space, and in the chloroplast in the thylakoid space. So one should know where the high concentration or the proton gradient will be built, and that is going to be built because of the energy from the electrons, and hence the electron transport chain. After the gradient is built, there is only one place for those protons to diffuse through, and that would be through ATP synthase, eventually phosphorylating the ADP to form ATP. We see a lot of similarities in both the processes. In case of photosynthesis, is the sunlight. In case of respiration, it is breaking down of glucose. Both the processes will move electrons, and those are moved using electron carriers. In case of photosynthesis, it's NADPH. In case of respiration, it's NADH and FADH2. When electrons are moved, those run those pumps, the proton pumps, which will pump the protons across those membranes. In case of photosynthesis, it's the thylakoid membrane. In case of cellular respiration, it is the inner membrane. Pumping the protons will create the gradient. It will build the gradient. In case of photosynthesis, the gradient will be built in the thylakoid space, and in respiration it will be built in the intermembrane space. By building the gradient, there will be a flow of protons, and the proton motive force will be used by ATP synthase to bond the inorganic phosphate to ADP and create or generate the ATP. So the story is the same. The ATP that gets built is built by ATP synthase in both the processes, and ATP synthase being that molecule, that protein that can convert the flow of protons into ATP, and this same protein is seen in both the energy organelles, and it was probably built by evolution in the common ancestor, and that was used in both of these processes where it uses the gradient, the flow of electrons, to build or generate ATP.